My guardians told me they couldn't afford a family trip. Then I found out they flew first class without me. I stayed quiet until my uncle smirked and said, "Maybe next time you should work harder." 5 days later, they weren't laughing anymore. I, 19M, had been living with my aunt and uncle since I was 14, after my parents died in a car accident. They took me in when no one else would, and for that, I was grateful. But gratitude has its limits, and I was about to discover exactly where mine ended. It started with the family vacation conversation. I had been working part-time at a local grocery store for 8 months, saving every penny I could while keeping up with my college courses. When summer break rolled around, my aunt mentioned they were planning a trip to Europe. I got excited, thinking this might be the first real family vacation we'd take together since I moved in. My uncle quickly shut that down. He explained that money was tight, the trip was expensive, and they simply couldn't afford to bring me along. I understood, or at least I tried to. They had already done so much for me, and I knew raising an unexpected teenager wasn't cheap. I told them I completely understood and wished them a great trip. The disappointment stung, but I buried it. I picked up extra shifts at work to keep myself busy while they were gone for 2 weeks. My coworkers kept asking why I looked so down, and I just told them my guardians were on vacation without me. Most of them seemed surprised, but I defended the decision, explaining how much they'd already sacrificed for me. They left on a Tuesday morning. I drove them to the airport in my beat-up Honda Civic, the same car I'd bought with money from my part-time job. My aunt hugged me goodbye and reminded me to keep the house clean. My uncle patted my shoulder and told me to stay out of trouble. I watched them disappear into the terminal, their expensive luggage rolling behind them. For the next 2 weeks, I worked double shifts and tried not to think about what they might be seeing in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. I house-sat, took care of their 2 cats, and even fixed a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. When they came back, they seemed refreshed and happy, showing me hundreds of photos on their phones. Everything seemed normal until I was helping my uncle set up his new laptop 3 days after their return. He asked me to transfer some files from his old computer, and while I was doing that, his email automatically synced. That's when I saw it, the flight confirmations. 2 first-class tickets to Paris. Round trip. The total cost made my stomach drop. It was more than I made in 6 months at my job. But what really hit me was the date on a second email. They had booked these tickets 8 months ago, right around the time I started working. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking slightly. They hadn't suddenly decided they couldn't afford to bring me. They had planned this trip without me from the very beginning. The conversation about money being tight was just an excuse to avoid including me. I closed the laptop without saying anything and went to my room. I needed time to process what I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was years of being grateful for their help, or maybe I was just trying to convince myself there was some reasonable explanation. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to their spending habits. My aunt bought a new designer purse the weekend after they returned. My uncle purchased expensive golf clubs he'd been wanting for months. They went out for dinner at upscale restaurants twice that week. None of this seemed like the behavior of people struggling financially. The breaking point came 5 days after I discovered the flight confirmations. We were at a family barbecue at my cousin's house. I was helping serve food when my uncle started telling everyone about their amazing European vacation. He went into detail about the first-class service, the champagne, the gourmet meals 30,000 feet in the air. My cousin asked why I hadn't gone with them, and my uncle answered before I could say anything. He told everyone that I hadn't worked hard enough to afford the trip, that maybe if I had a better work ethic, I could have joined them. Then he smirked at me and added that maybe next time I should work harder. The barbecue went silent for a moment. I felt every pair of eyes on me, some sympathetic, others just curious. My face burned with embarrassment and anger. I excused myself and went inside, claiming I needed to use the bathroom. Standing in that bathroom mirror, I made a decision. I was done being the grateful orphan who accepted whatever scraps were thrown my way. If they wanted to play games, I could play too. The next morning, I started planning. I had been accepted to a state university 3 hours away for the fall semester, with a partial scholarship I'd earned through my grades. My aunt and uncle knew about this, and they'd been supportive, even offering to help with the remaining costs. But after what I discovered, I realized I needed to become completely independent. First, I applied for additional financial aid and student loans to cover everything the scholarship didn't. It took some paperwork and a few phone calls, but I managed to secure enough funding to cover tuition, room, board, and expenses for the entire academic year. Next, I quietly started moving my important belongings out of their house. Not everything at once. That would be too obvious. Just a few items each day when I went to work. I stored everything in my locker at the grocery store and in my car. The most important step was opening my own bank account at a different bank. I'd been using an account my uncle had helped me set up when I first started working, and he was listed as a co-owner. I transferred all my savings to the new account and changed my direct deposit information. I also reached out to my high school guidance counselor, who had always been supportive. I explained my situation without going into too much detail about the vacation incident. She helped me connect with resources for students in transitional situations and even found a summer program at my future university where I could work and take a few early credits. For 2 weeks, I acted completely normal around my aunt and uncle. I went to work, came home, did my chores, and participated in family dinners. They had no idea what was coming. The revelation came on a Thursday evening. I waited until after dinner, when we were all relaxing in the living room. My uncle was reading the newspaper, and my aunt was watching television. I cleared my throat and told them I needed to discuss something important. I started by thanking them for everything they'd done for me over the past 5 years. I acknowledged that taking in a teenager couldn't have been easy, and I was genuinely grateful for the roof over my head and the stability they provided. They both smiled, probably expecting some heartfelt moment of gratitude. Then I told them I'd discovered something that had changed my perspective on our relationship. I explained that I'd seen the flight confirmations for their European trip while helping with the computer transfer. I detailed exactly what I'd found: the first-class tickets, the cost, the booking date that proved they'd planned the trip without me from the beginning. My uncle's face went pale, and my aunt started to stammer some kind of explanation. But I held up my hand and continued. I explained that discovering their deception had been painful, but what really hurt was the public humiliation at the barbecue. Being told that I needed to work harder in front of our entire extended family, when I'd been working constantly, while they flew first class on a vacation they'd never intended to include me on, was the final straw. My aunt tried to interrupt, claiming they'd wanted to bring me, but the cost was just too much. I calmly pointed out that the cost of their first-class tickets would have easily covered an economy ticket for me, with money left over. I also mentioned that I'd noticed their spending habits since returning from the trip didn't suggest financial hardship. My uncle got defensive, raising his voice and demanding to know why I'd been snooping through his personal files. I reminded him that he had specifically asked me to help with the computer transfer, and the emails had synced automatically. I hadn't been snooping. I'd stumbled onto information he hadn't been careful enough to hide. The conversation quickly devolved into an argument. They accused me of being ungrateful and entitled. I accused them of being dishonest and manipulative. Things were said that couldn't be taken back. Finally, I delivered the news that would change everything. I told them I'd be leaving in 3 days to start the summer program at my university. I'd secured full financial aid for college, found housing, and arranged transportation. I no longer needed their financial support or their roof over my head. The shock on their faces was immediate and intense. My aunt started crying, claiming I was overreacting and throwing away our family relationship over a misunderstanding. My uncle demanded to know how I'd managed to arrange everything without their knowledge or permission. I explained that I was 19 years old and legally an adult. I didn't need their permission to make decisions about my future. As for how I'd arranged everything, I told them the same thing my uncle had told me at the barbecue. Maybe I'd just worked harder. Update 1. The next 3 days were incredibly tense. My aunt alternated between trying to guilt me into staying and giving me the silent treatment. My uncle seemed torn between anger and what might have been regret, though he never actually apologized. On my last day, as I was loading the final boxes into my car, my aunt made one last attempt to convince me to stay. She admitted they should have handled the vacation situation differently, but she insisted they'd only excluded me because they wanted some alone time as a couple. She claimed the money excuse was just a way to avoid hurting my feelings. I told her I might have understood that reasoning if they'd been honest about it from the beginning. What I couldn't forgive was the lie followed by the public humiliation. If they'd wanted alone time, they could have said so. Instead, they chose deception and then made me the villain for not working hard enough. My uncle appeared as I was closing my car trunk. He asked if I was really going to throw away 5 years of family history over one mistake. I reminded him that the mistake wasn't just the vacation. It was the pattern of treating me like a burden while expecting gratitude for basic care. I drove away that afternoon without looking back. The 3-hour drive to my new life gave me plenty of time to think about everything that had happened. I felt sad about leaving, but I also felt free for the first time in years. Update 2. The summer program at university was exactly what I needed. I took 2 courses that counted toward my degree, worked 25 hours a week in the campus bookstore, and lived in a small dorm room that felt more like home than my aunt and uncle's house ever had. My aunt called twice during the first month. Both conversations were brief and awkward. She updated me on family news and asked how I was adjusting to life on my own. I was polite but distant. She never mentioned the vacation incident or apologized for their behavior. My uncle never called. The real test came in August, when my cousin got married. I'd been invited to the wedding months earlier, back when things were normal between my guardians and me. I decided to attend because I genuinely wanted to celebrate my cousin's happiness, but I knew it would be awkward. At the reception, several family members approached me with questions about why I'd moved out so suddenly. My aunt had apparently told everyone I'd decided to live on campus early to get adjusted to college life. She hadn't mentioned our fight or the circumstances that led to my departure. I kept my responses vague and positive, focusing on how well I was doing in my summer program and how excited I was for the fall semester. I didn't want to create drama at my cousin's wedding, but I also wasn't going to pretend everything was perfect. The moment I'd been dreading came when my uncle approached me during the cocktail hour. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He asked how I was doing and commented that I looked good. I thanked him and asked about his work. Then he surprised me. He said he'd been thinking about our last conversation and admitted that maybe they should have handled the vacation situation differently. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was closer than I'd expected to get. I told him I appreciated him saying that, but I also explained that I was happy with my decision to become independent. I'd learned a lot about myself over the past few months, and I felt more confident and self-reliant than ever before. He nodded and seemed to accept that. We talked for a few more minutes about neutral topics before he excused himself to mingle with other guests. Update 3. Fall semester started 2 weeks after the wedding, and I threw myself into college life. My course load was challenging but manageable, and I continued working part-time to cover my personal expenses. I made friends with my roommate and several people in my classes. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. In October, I received an unexpected call from my aunt. She sounded different, less defensive, and more genuinely concerned. She explained that she'd been thinking about our relationship and the events that led to my leaving. She said she wanted to understand my perspective better and asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee the next time I was in town. I was hesitant at first, but something in her tone made me think she was genuinely trying to make amends. I agreed to meet with her during my fall break. The coffee meeting was awkward at first, but my aunt seemed committed to having an honest conversation. She admitted that they'd made several mistakes in how they handled the vacation situation. She acknowledged that lying about the money was wrong and that my uncle's comment at the barbecue was completely inappropriate. More importantly, she recognized that they'd often treated me more like an obligation than a family member. She said they'd gotten so focused on providing basic care, food, shelter, transportation, that they'd forgotten to include me emotionally in their family. I appreciated her honesty, and I told her so. I also explained how the vacation incident had been the breaking point in a series of experiences that made me feel like an outsider in their home. I gave her specific examples of times when I'd felt excluded or dismissed, and she listened without getting defensive. We talked for nearly 2 hours, and by the end of the conversation, I felt like we'd made real progress. She asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship, and I told her I was open to it, but it would take time and continued effort from both sides. My uncle remained more distant. He sent me a card for my 20th birthday with a brief note saying he hoped I was doing well in school. It wasn't much, but it was something. As I write this, it's been almost a year since I left their house. I'm finishing my freshman year of college with a 3.7 GPA. I've been promoted to a supervisor position at my campus job, and I'm planning to spend the summer working at a paid internship related to my major. My relationship with my aunt has slowly improved. We talk on the phone every few weeks, and she visited campus once to take me to dinner. She's made a real effort to show interest in my life and goals, not just my academic performance. My uncle and I exchange polite texts occasionally, but we haven't had any deep conversations since the wedding. Some family members have expressed disappointment that I don't visit more often or maintain closer relationships with my guardians. They think I'm being ungrateful or holding a grudge over something minor. But they weren't the ones who lived in that house for 5 years, feeling like a tolerated guest rather than a family member. The truth is, leaving was the best decision I could have made. I learned that I'm capable of taking care of myself, that I don't need to accept poor treatment out of gratitude, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and demand respect. I don't regret the way I handled the situation. My guardians needed to understand that their actions had consequences, and I needed to prove to myself that I could build a life on my own terms. The quiet satisfaction I felt watching their shocked faces when I announced my independence was worth every difficult moment that followed. Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness and gratitude for submission. My aunt and uncle learned that I was neither weak nor submissive. I was just a young man who had been pushed too far and finally decided to push back. The best revenge wasn't some elaborate scheme or public humiliation. It was simply proving that I didn't need them as much as they thought I did, and that their treatment of me said more about their character than mine. 5 days after my uncle smirked and told me to work harder, they weren't laughing anymore. They were realizing that the grateful orphan they'd taken for granted was strong enough to walk away. And I've never looked back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.